Welcome back to another episode of the Pick Up and Play podcast, folks. My name is DJ Switch, and today my guest is Dan from the Northwest Pinball and Arcade Show, which happens up in Tacoma, Washington, a couple hours north of me. And what can I say? As somebody who has a particular interest in all things arcade and pinball culture, this was a fascinating interview for me. It's always really cool to learn more about what other arcade events like this one have going on. And what really surprised me, I think, about this show was some of the more fascinating and interesting and obscure machines that get featured up at the Northwest Pinball and Arcade Show. So I hope you all have a game ready, and I hope you all are sitting back and relaxing and enjoying yourself as you listen to this interview with Dan from the Northwest Pinball and Arcade Show. As always, my thanks to all of my Patreon folks, my thanks to the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, and of course, stick around as I tell you a little bit more about our sponsor for this episode, Vault 31 Bar. Okay, folks, with that, let's get to the interview. Dan, thank you so much for joining me today on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I saw a comment from you on a thing, like a mutual friend of ours on social media. I saw a comment from you and I was like, that looks like an interesting thing. And being an arcade DJ myself, and having this new podcast platform, I was like, I need to talk to that guy. So that's why I reached out, man. I really want to learn more about the Northwest Pinball and Arcade Show, but before we talk about the actual show proper, I want to get to know you a little bit, man, because you and I ever met before?
I don't think so.
Have you been to the Portland Retro Gaming Expo?
I have not.
Oh,
I go to
okay.
Portland a lot. I know a lot of like pinball and arcade players and collectors down there.
Gotcha.
I know a bunch of people from the music scene down there.
Okay. So that would explain why you and I haven't crossed paths yet, but we definitely should fix that, I think. What you're doing up there now, the show itself is in Tacoma, right?
Yep, at the Tacoma Convention Center.
Okay. And you're building out just a massive arcade at the convention center, and is it mostly just the arcade, or are there other like speaking things, like do you have like guest speakers and that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Pinball and arcade games for sure. There's like tournaments, a bunch of huge tournaments, and we bring speakers in. So it's some arcade designers and pinball people that made and designed new pinball machines, and they
Right
come
on.
talk about it.
I like that. So then what in your past made you decide that I want to do this? I want to build out a 400 cabinet arcade at a convention center and bring all the nerds together, because I'm sure there was one specific thing in your past that made you go, I want to do that.
I think it's a couple things. It's a culmination of stuff. When I was a kid, I used to always go to arcades. I grew up in the 80s, and that was like my thing. We'd go out to Bellevue here, and there was like a combination D&D store that had a dark arcade in the back, behind a curtain, I almost think. And you go back, and there was like, this would have been like 83, 84, early arcade games and pinball machines. And I started playing them there and kind of got hooked. And
in
then
the
later...
mid-80s. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no.
Well, I was just going to say, it's interesting because in the mid-80s, it was usually the arcade machines were out front and the D&D stuff was hidden in the back away from away from the religious folks, but in this place it was kind of the opposite, I guess, huh? They had the D&D out front.
D&D kind of was like in a little wave right then.
Okay.
And arcade games were like starting to overtake pinball, I think. So I got introduced to arcade games first. But then there was like a Black Knight pinball machine in the corner, and it would always like talk shit. It'd be like, the Black Knight will slay you out of nowhere when I'd be playing arcade games. And I was like, God, I gotta slay that bastard. So I was like, I finally played pinball because pinball seemed intimidating to me. Arcade games seemed okay because I had an Atari at home. But once I played pinball, I started to get hooked on that too. So I played games all growing up. And my big hobby was like publishing. I wrote a big punk rock scene in the Northwest for like 10 years called 10 Things. And I published another music magazine. And I was kind of starting to lose my energy for publishing, and print was kind of dying in like 2000s. And I had started collecting pinball and arcade games. And I started collecting pinball and arcade games because I went to a party at like some skater's house, and they had a whole bunch of arcade games in their kitchen. And I was like, you can own these? I was incredulous. And so I was like, huh. I started looking at like classified ads online and stuff. And it turned out at that time, no one was collecting games. So it was like really easy to pick up like a Street Fighter 2 cabinet for $50 and things like that. So I collected for a long time, and I started to know people in the community because I didn't know how to fix my games and they'd break down. And I started to meet people that taught me how to fix them. And then it came to this point where I was thinking of stopping publishing my magazine because it was not working anymore. And these guys in the local arcade and pinball community are like, we want to put on this show. And they were like talking about it in local forums. And we did it at the Seattle Center the first year. It was like 2008, I think.
Okay.
It's been going for a long time. And I'm like, I don't know how I can help with this show except for bringing some games. But then they put out their poster, and their poster was just all text. And me coming from the music scene, I'm like, I know a bunch of poster artists and people that hang posters. And I'm like, let me like help out with what I can do. And that's, I can help with promotions. Like my old magazine used to put on like club nights all around town, town in Seattle. And I was like, let me get one of my friends. I bet I can get someone that will do the poster for free. It'll look rock and roll. We can like cover the town telephone poles with the posters, and I can do social media. And so that's kind of how I got involved. I didn't know what it was going to become.
So you built out the street team for the pinball show.
Yeah, because the poster sucked.
It's always funny to me because I mean, obviously, coming from the music scene myself here in Portland, when I made the decision to get involved in more of like the professional nerd space, doing things like the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, things like Rose City Comic Con, I started picking up these like bigger scale like expo and convention events, and I started to kind of notice a really common trend at the time was that all of their promotion was terrible.
Right.
And so like as the the guy coming from the music scene, I was like, y'all need to be working a lot harder and paying a lot less money for this stuff because you're overpaying for everything and it's doing nothing for you.
Yeah, I feel like nerd culture has figured that out.
Finally, these days, for sure.
10, 15 years ago, no.
That's funny because and the reason why I kind of laughed, I gotta admit this, because the folks listening on Spotify may or may not notice, but I know the folks on YouTube definitely are going to notice. I laughed when you mentioned that print was dying. And the reason I laughed at that was because from like 2004 to 2007, I was a journalism major. And I was writing for my weekly newspaper in college. And so I exceedingly, like embarrassingly aware of how much the print business was dying in the mid 2000s.
But you did not go into debt publishing a magazine.
I didn't, but I also never made it into radio, which brings us to my podcast, because radio was going the same direction about the same time.
Right.
The internet was just destroying media as we knew it left and right, and it was the steamroller that couldn't be stopped. So here we are. I'll never have a TV career. I'll never have a radio career. I'll never have a newspaper career. And I've learned to be okay with that, because it's 2024. And as much as we enjoy the sort of like retro side of the gaming scene, it's still 2024.
Yeah.
So I really dig that story though, man, especially the part about the D&D shop with the arcade in the back.
Triple Alliance.
But barring the decision to like jump in and help with the promotion stuff, did you get to a certain point where you thought, well, I can take this over and I can run this thing? Like, what's your position now with the Northwest Pinball and Arcade Show, and what's your team look like?
We have over 150 volunteers usually, which is volunteering, working at the different desks at it.
Wow.
Bringing games, helping set up, break down. It's fully a nonprofit show, all volunteer run.
That's incredible.
So we have a nonprofit board that oversees it, like any nonprofit has to have. We do a lot of behind the scenes work. I think we're working for 6 months to put on a show that happens for 3 days.
Yeah.
So my role is I'm on the board. I handle sponsorships, promotion, press, the website, mostly marketing, promotions, getting people in the door, and press once we're there, if the press show up. Because we usually have TV cameras that just randomly show up during the show.
Right.
But I don't shy away from all the stuff that the volunteers that have less glamorous jobs do. So I prep a bunch of my games. I have a big collection. You can see some of it behind me.
Yeah.
I'm there for setup. I'm there for teardown. I set up dozens and dozens of pinball machines and tear down dozens of them and haul them around. And I help with every aspect of that.
Is that Terminator 2 behind you?
That is.
So, one of my DJs. So I have a team of DJs here in Portland, and if anybody who's listening to this that is subscribed to my Patreon would have seen the Patreon only episode 0 that I put up as we were sort of like testing the waters for this show and getting ready before I produced my first episode like properly. Well, that episode 0 is with basically my second in command, the guy that I bring on every year, one of my best friends in the world, and he's also an incredibly talented DJ that takes over for me on Saturday nights at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo so that I can go home and get some sleep, because I got to be there all day Friday, all day Saturday, and all day Sunday, right?
I'm familiar with this.
Yeah. That's a schedule you might have experienced yourself once or twice. And so he goes by Meklo. And Meklo, as a matter of fact, has a Terminator 2 machine in his basement. It's his absolute favorite machine in the world. And so when he and his wife made a little bit of money, she's like, okay, you can pick one thing. And he's like, a Terminator 2 machine. That's the one thing that I want in the world. And so he made that dream come true for himself. So now every time I see one of those machines, like, I immediately think of one of my best friends.
Nice.
It's funny, man. You got me laughing again, because the whole experience of like dealing with TV and dealing with media at the show. There was a year, this must have been probably 5 years ago now, at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, where we had the TV crews show up, and they wanted to do a big piece on the expo, and they said, hey, listen, can you have your DJ just pump the brakes on the music for a little bit so we can shoot some interviews and some sound around the show floor? And the president of the board at the time said, well, how long do you need? And they go, oh, give us 20 minutes. So we'll shoot as quickly as we can. Just give us about 20 minutes. 3 hours later, the entire floor has been sitting there in silence while I've been just sitting there with my arms crossed going like, do I go get lunch? Like, what do I do at this point? They're literally paying me to be there and make noise, and I'm not allowed to make any noise because of the TV, folks. So they're just paying me to sit there, I guess. My president at the time was I mean, kudos to him for having the patience to not completely chew their head off when he finally went to them and said, "Hey, we need you to be done now." Because those TV folks come in, they sort of take over, and then it's like, if you let them, they'll just run over everything. So
Right.
you have to kind of like put your foot down and go, no, we have a thing that we're doing here, and you're kind of ruining the experience for people. So yeah, I've
Right,
certainly been
because
there.
you want them to cover the show. You want new people to be exposed to it,
Yeah,
especially if they're covering it on a Friday or Saturday. People might come down on the next day
right.
or that day, or the next year because it's now in their radar.
Yeah,
Um, so they're great to have them there. But yeah, you don't want to compromise on the experience of the people that are there and paid for tickets
no.
to have a good time, and the atmosphere has been brought down by having them there.
Well, I'm kind of grateful, with modern, YouTube and modern editing styles. Everything is a lot faster now. The way that television is edited, the way that YouTube videos are edited, and so it's really nice that I don't have to stop playing the music anymore. They just shoot B-roll and then go shoot the interviews out in the hallway or something.
Right.
Someplace where
Yeah.
the music isn't.
Yeah.
Oh man. So is that something that you guys have to deal with? Is music and sort of noise bleed
So
and that kind of thing?
we do not play music
Mm,
during the show because everyone wants to hear the pinball and arcade games as they're playing them.
yeah.
Um,
I
but
totally
then
get that.
but then we have competing sounds,
Right.
So we're bringing 450 games from different collectors' houses, and they all have it set up for their basement and how they like it. And uh, some are like screaming loud next to a quiet game because there's some guy that plays his pinball in his basement while his wife and kids are upstairs, and he wants it to be quiet.
Yeah.
Or there's someone that just has cranking parties and they have them all turned up really loud. So that's part of setup is we do like power and ground testing on games to make sure no one's going to get shocked, and we do some adjustments with the sound trying to kind of level it all so nothing's out competing the other ones. But then a vendor will come in and they'll just crank up big speakers, and our biggest vendor, Marco, brings all the brand new Stern pinball machines. So they'll set up like 20, 25 of them, huge displays. I'm expecting
Yeah.
it to be all about Jaws this year because the new Jaws game just came out, which will be rad, but it can't dominate the sound of the other games too. So.
Right. Yeah, we've had the Stern folks at the Portland show more than a few times, and they always do a really great job, and they always have an incredible display of machines that they bring out, but
Yeah.
also, that part where they're putting them across the DJ from the DJ for a reason. Like
Right.
you're not going to drown me out, man, so just like chill. Oh man, the show sounds really fun, and I really appreciate, because I hear that a lot as the guy playing the music on the hall floor at the Portland Expo. Like I'm always having to work with the arcade collectors and the pinball collectors and sort of to sort of like find that balance of I want the music playing, because we want to create the arcade experience. A lot
Right.
of arcades had DJs or they just had music playing, from behind the counter or whatever. So we want that to be part of the experience, but we also understand that a lot of collectors the sound of the machines is part of the experience as well.
Yeah.
And we have certainly gone through some growing pains trying to figure out how to find that balance over the years. But I'll tell you, man, like one of the greatest memories I ever had was I had a turntable go down. I lost it was like a ground came loose or something on one of my turntable wires, and so I put one of my other DJs on. I said, "Hey, cover me for a bit. I got to go fix this." And I went. I think this was 2018. I went and I pulled that turntable out of my booth and walked it across the aisleway to where they had like the repair center set up for all the arcade
guys
stuff.
repaired your turntable?
No. The owner of the biggest arcade in Portland, a place called Ground Control, it's been here for stinking ever.
I know Ground Control.
And so, do you know Anthony from Ground Control?
No.
So Anthony was there, in the repair area, and so I walked up, and I'd known Anthony for years at that point, and I walked up and say, "Hey man, my turntable's down. Do you have a soldering iron?" And he goes, "Here's the soldering iron. You can sit here and use my bench." And he turns to one of the guys working there, and he goes, "Hey, DJ Switch gets to use any of my tools he wants to. Just give him whatever he wants." I had that thing up and running in 20 minutes, man. Which is probably the fastest I've ever torn down a turntable to resolder an RCA cable. But yeah, it was cool on a couple of levels. One, because like thanks to the arcade guys, I was able to get right back up and running. But also because of the sound thing I mentioned, I hadn't always had the best history with the arcade guys. And over the years, we've not only learned to sort of coexist with each other, but then when something happened and they came to my rescue, frankly, and really, really helped me out. And I'm so appreciative of that, because it really was like a turning point in our relationship between me and the arcade guys at the Portland show. And I'm so grateful for that. So it's really cool to see, that side of the gaming community and how they, no matter what like drama is happening or whatever kind of nonsense is going on, like there comes that sort of crystallizing moment of like, all right, everybody, let's band together. Let's get this thing back up and running. And we'll settle the other stuff later.
We have had hundreds of those moments at our show over the years. There was like people that were strictly pinball collectors and people that were strictly arcade collectors and not sure, where each fit in.
Yeah.
And then the pinball collectors start buying a couple arcade games, and arcade collectors start buying a few pinball games. Turns out working on electronics is all the same. So we have like in the center of our show what we call the medic station.
Yeah.
And we have just a crew of guys and women that work on games.
Nice.
We have like junior medics that fix stuck balls on pinball machines, because that happens all the time during a show.
Mm-hmm.
And fix little problems. We have people that are just seasoned veterans that can rip apart a game and rebuild something on the fly there.
Yeah.
And they all started helping each other, working together, because we're all on this common goal to keep as many of the games going as possible the entire show, which is hard when games are from the 70s, 80s, even modern games. Electronic components are going to fail. When you've had your games like in your house and you turn them on for an hour every 2 or 3 weeks or something, and then you turn them on for like 3 days straight, shit starts to fry.
Yeah.
Old capacitors. I mean, I'm sure it's the same thing that happens with DJ equipment.
Yeah, I mean, layers of dust. I mean, you think a little bit of dust is fine until you realize that little bit of dust has been building for weeks or sometimes months. And then you go and flip that switch and all of a sudden, poof, wait, what happened? Why is this not working?
Right.
Yeah, and it's really impressive to me how like nothing will bring a bunch of nerds together like an arcade machine that goes down or and I'm sure this is an experience that you're very familiar with, but the one guy that was hired to help out for the weekend and no one told them not to touch the glass to the concrete floor.
Like,
Uh
right?
and then has to learn the hard way how much that glass really costs.
Yeah, I think, I'm kind of amazed we don't drop and break more games than we do transporting them.
Yeah.
And our show's unique. It's the only one I think in the world that we rent trucks and hire movers and have our own crews that go to people's houses and pick up their collections and bring them
Oh,
to the show.
wow.
Um, we've done that since the beginning, and
Hmm.
sometimes we question whether we should be doing that because that is a
Yeah, I mean,
massive endeavor.
yeah.
Um, but sometimes people's games get banged up. I've actually had the most drops, which is 2 drops in like the 17 years we've been doing the show.
Wow.
Uh, uh, which has been a bummer both times. But we just take the show budget and we replace the game or the part that breaks or whatever. And during the show, we're replacing all kinds of people's parts. People are like, bring their game that's in pretty good shape. Sometimes it leaves the show in better condition because it's had parts replaced on it during the show. Um, which
Thanks,
is
medic
I think
station.
awesome. I mean, I
Yeah.
got my games back last time, and there was a note inside that said replace the bumper bracket, the pop bumper solenoid, and I was like, wow,
Hmm.
I didn't even know that. And I walk around fairly often and look at my games and see if they're all functioning great. I didn't even see them go down. And
Huh.
someone had replaced some major hard to reach parts in it that had died. It's fantastic.
Tiny hands, I'm telling you, man. I I have I have big hands. I'm a big dude. I'm like 6'4", right? So whenever I see somebody like working on, especially the older machines that weren't as accessible, like some of the parts in the older machines weren't really designed to be like so easy to work on as some of the newer stuff. It's always like really really impressive to me.
Yeah, well, I would say some of the newer pinball machines are really hard too,
Really?
uh, because electronic boards are like all really fine work on them,
Yeah.
where people are more likely to replace them than repair them.
I would imagine that's a big difference now too with like modern machines is a lot of the electronics are built around things like microprocessors and like surface soldering that didn't
Yeah, it's
really
the surface
exist in the
soldering.
70s.
Yeah,
It wasn't really
I
a thing back
it's
then.
I feel like my era of soldering is up there. Like I have a bunch of '90s pinball machines. I love that era of Bally Williams games.
Nice.
Um, all those you can work on.
Yeah.
Uh, some of the modern Sterns, I don't think most people can work on the boards. It's more people just replace it, um, which is okay, but it's a little sad.
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it creates more waste, and as far as the hobby, once you get really into the hobby, fixing boards and fixing your problems, and you have that triumph of bringing a dead game back to life is it's awesome.
Yeah. A lot of folks that listen to this show are probably familiar at this point with, me growing up in a computer store. My dad had a computer store in the 80s and early 90s. Well, I mean, he had the store until 2017, but like it was mid 90s when we kind of switched over to Windows stuff. But he ran the store for better than 10 years before Windows. So it was all Commodores and it was all older stuff. And, I watched my dad. I don't even know how many times I watched my dad explain the concept of planned obsolescence to his
Right?
clients and what that meant. And then watched him sort of like explain to somebody like, listen, buy this thing that will run forever, or you can buy this newer thing, and if it breaks, you're going to have to replace it with a whole new thing because you can't fix it like you
Right.
used to, and I mean, shoot, even into like the early 2010s, we still had customers that would bring us old Amiga machines and stuff to get the RAM port resoldered, things like that just it's not even really a thing on modern computers anymore. RAM slot goes down, the whole motherboard needs to be replaced.
The question I have is, did they really build them to be fixed, or was it just the way they built them was easier back then and less complex
I
and didn't
think
involve a computer soldering everything?
I mean, obviously I can't speak for the entire computer industry. But if I were to, I would venture some kind of an educated guess along the lines of, it wasn't so much that they built them to be more repairable in the early days. It's more that over time they learned that they could save money by building them to be less repairable, and
Right.
therefore sort of like manipulating
No.
the bottom line over time.
Because then you've got to come back to them to buy a replacement board.
I mean, shoot, I don't know if you're familiar with the company iFixit,
Yeah.
but a big part of their mission statement is all about bringing back the right to repair, and bringing back the idea that a lot of modern electronics, you can repair them without having to outright replace them. Instead of spending $1,000 on a new smartphone, you spend maybe $100 on a new screen.
Yeah.
And here's all the tools that you need to replace it yourself, rather than having to just go buy a new phone. And it cuts down on waste, what they call e-waste. I'm sure you're familiar, but just in case our listeners haven't heard that term before, e-waste and sort of modern electronics that end up piling up in somebody's back room or in the landfills or whatever, and just never to be used again. It's a real problem, and it's getting worse. Folks, I am thrilled to announce that this episode has once again been sponsored by Vault 31 Bar. Vault 31 is a state-of-the-art shelter designed by the best minds in the business for absolutely anyone that's 21 plus and lives for all things video games and geek culture. If you need to quench your thirst after a long day in the wasteland, Vault 31 offers an incredible selection of beverages and signature cocktails to help you rehydrate. Or if you're hungry, they've got plenty of delicious options available from their kitchen, including their new Smurshbergs or my recently discovered favorite, the Batcave. Since they are a gaming bar, they have tons of PC and console games available to play. And whether you hail from the Brotherhood, the Institute, the Atom Cats, or the Minutemen, every nerd from New California to the Commonwealth is welcome here. Vault 31 is just off East Mill Plain in Vancouver, Washington, and only a short 10 to 12 minute trip across the river from the Portland International Airport. Be sure to visit them at vault31bar.com or at Vault31Bar on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, and Twitch. Vault 31 is easily one of my favorite hangout spots in the greater Portland area, which is why I'm both flattered and excited to be partnering with them on bringing you future episodes of this podcast. Please be sure to check out their events calendar to find out what they'll be up to next. And when you do get a chance to stop by, please let them know I sent you. Maybe I'll even see you there. And with that, let's get back to the show. In the world of arcades and pinballs, I imagine, especially because those spaces aren't nearly as popular as they were in the sort of the height of, say, the late 80s, early 90s. Do you find that you run into a lot of issues with getting parts or being able to find certain components to be able to repair those older machines that just aren't made anymore?
Yes, up until about 5 years ago.
What happened 5 years ago?
Well, pinball had a huge comeback. So with pinball, the people that bought the rights to own the licenses for Bally Williams games started reproducing all the hardware for it,
Oh,
the
wow.
stuff on the top. I mean, they reproduce the artwork that gets damaged over time, that gets broken.
Holy
Uh,
cow.
you can get replacement play fields that are screened, clear coated. Uh, yeah, no, it's pinball's huger than almost. I wouldn't say that it was in its height because like the Adams family back here, I think they made like 17,000 or 22,000 of them.
Yeah.
That's like one of the pinball machines they made the most of. Um,
I called out
and
your
it's still
Terminator
awesome.
machine. I was gonna say I called out your Terminator machine, but I am extremely familiar with the other two as well. Both
Okay.
Adams Family and Star Trek. I have spent so much time playing those machines.
Um, and I have an alternative back glass on my Star Trek Next Generation.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
but so with pinball machines, there's just been a mammoth, and I think the pandemic had a lot to do with it.
Mm,
The prices on the old games just suddenly shot up. They got more sought after. People were much more the collector market,
yeah.
like grew. Um, I think Stern says 50% of the games they sell now goes to the collector market, or even more than that, instead of out on location.
Yeah.
Uh, so suddenly, a bunch of people were stuck at home with money, and they built arcades in their basements. Uh,
Yeah.
which I'm glad I bought all my 90s games before that because the prices have like tripled or quadrupled since then. And it's even happening with arcade games now. So because people have a bunch of old ones, people are making parts for them. The people that own the original licenses for the artwork and stuff definitely are making parts. The companies that can build the hardware that goes underneath the playfields are building them. There's companies reproducing the game boards for old arcade games. I've got a missile command over here and a joust over here. Um, there's multi boards that people make that plug into the original boards.
Really?
So yeah, and most of the artwork's been replaced. So for any like common game that it's worth money for someone to reproduce the artwork, um, or reproduce the boards, they're out there. There's lots of companies doing it. So,
Interesting.
but but what happens is there's certain, if you're trying to keep it all original, which we collectors often try to do,
Sure.
that's where you start to run into problems. Trying to keep like a color vector monitor from the 80s alive with the original boards.
Yeah.
Or trying to, those 70s and 80s boards, especially for our arcade games. There's components on there that the chips are no longer available. People are trying to buy the last bit of chips. There's companies bootlegging the chips, like scraping off chips and printing stuff on them. Like, I don't even see how they make money on that, but
Yeah. Yeah.
they're all Chinese companies, and they're salvaging old electronics and trying to repackage some of it.
I mean, there's certainly no shortage of that on the console side of things. I mean, every single vendor I know, and at this point, after over a decade of working with the Portland show, like I know a lot of them. Every one of them is an expert in spotting a fake cartridge, or spotting that's the wrong kind of screw, or there's too many screws in that one, or that's the wrong artwork, or that artwork looks like it was printed on a inkjet, $100 inkjet, and not the multi-$1,000 laser printers that they use at Nintendo. Like
Yeah,
there's little things that have sort of come out of the woodwork over the years, to identify a fake, or identify an unoriginal mod to a Game Boy, or a Game Gear, or a GameCube, or insert any console here. So I completely get where you're coming from on that, because it's frustrating, especially when you've got a lot of folks in the collector space that are doing it for the passion, doing it for the love of the hobby, and doing it for the love of the games, and then people see an opportunity to take advantage of us.
yeah.
And it's especially guys like you and me that are trying to do this in a very public space, by operating these shows. Like it's got to be infuriating. I get frustrated thinking about it, but I'm sure it's got to be infuriating for you to think about all of the hurdles you have to go through just to keep some of your original hardware original.
Yeah, I'm not totally an originalist, so
Sure.
I throw multi game boards in my games and stuff. But yeah, no, the biggest part is some of the bootleg stuff. The
Yeah.
artwork is terrible.
Yeah.
Uh, the
Yeah.
chips, like it's like really grainy, like they just grabbed it off someone else's website and then reprinted it. And some of the chips just don't work.
Yeah.
Uh, but you know, I've been a collector of comics and records, and that stuff's just it's prevalent in every collector scene.
I wouldn't know anything about the records. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, it's funny too, because like you were talking about how the pinball side of things really blew up over the course of the pandemic. A lot of people were getting into collecting and restoring and refurbishing these old pinball machines. Dude, the same thing happened on the vinyl side.
Oh yeah,
Anybody that was collecting records was all of a sudden going from paying, $12 to $15 a disc to 20, 25. I literally just saw a pre-order for the band Linkin Park is putting out like a greatest hits 2-disc thing that they're doing. And one variant of it that they're offering on their store is $60
oh yeah,
for a 2-disc greatest hits record.
yep.
And I love that band and I love their music.
They're gonna limit it to like 1,000 copies and make it on colored vinyl. And
I will never pay $60 for that, and I damn sure I'm not going to pay more than $60 on the secondhand market. That's just never going to happen.
Yeah.
So, more power to anybody that thinks they can scalp them and make more money off of them. But I'm good with just a standard record. I just want the music,
At least that's bands capitalizing on their success and the resurgence of vinyl and
Right.
trying to do like fan editions, short runs that make people
Sure.
get excited that they get one. I feel like that's different than bootlegging, but it definitely happens.
Well, no, I'm talking just the secondhand market in general.
Oh, yeah,
It's just it's gotten wild on eBay. It's gotten wild, thanks to
Discogs.
yeah. Oh, don't get me started on Discogs. Man, can I tell you, I have deleted that app off my phone so many times, but then I keep having to reinstall it to go find that thing that I'm looking for.
Well, that's how if you're ever going to sell any of your vinyl, that's how you price it too.
Yeah. And thankfully I've got a good relationship with a couple of the stores here in town. So like I do okay with those guys, kind of, working things out, quid pro quo kind of stuff. Hey man, give me a good deal. I'll come play a show for you, that kind of thing. But yeah, man, it's it's crazy to me how much video gaming has changed and sort of leaned into what we often refer to as the retro gaming space. But that term retro, and this is a conversation I had a few episodes ago when I had the current vice president of the Portland Retro Gaming Expo on the show. The term retro is constantly changing, and now it's like what does retro mean? People don't want to admit that the Wii came out 20 years ago,
right?
Because we think retro is Atari and NES and Sega Genesis, and really, like, technically the Xbox 360 and the PS3 were capable of 1080p output over HDMI, and that was 20 years ago. So we're not,
right.
We're not really.
It depends on how old you are.
Yeah, I mean, so that's I think it's funny to me that one of the interesting sort of staying powers of pinball is that these retro conversations I think don't happen in the same way, because pinball as a concept is retro in and of itself. And so anytime you run into a machine with a mechanical ball and and mechanical flippers, you're instantly transported back to that time and space. And I think it's wonderful.
Right. So every pinball, and this is where arcade games and pinball games are different.
Mm,
Every pinball game you walk up to, you're going to have two buttons to hit, at least two flippers, and a ball bouncing around.
yeah,
Um, and the mechanical part going on. So whether you've played the game before or not, you know the basics of what you have to do, which is not let that ball fall down in the middle or out on the edges. Um,
that's day one
although
stuff. Yeah,
I will say modern pinball machines are very different in that they
mm,
have a lot of depth and levels you have to go for, different things that build upon each other.
yeah,
Um, that, you know, so I collect pinball machines. I played them forever.
right.
I'm not that great at playing them. I enjoy the hobby and collecting, but I'm like having a party one time, and I come down into my basement, and this dude's playing like my Doctor Who, and he's in some wizard mode, and I'm like, I did not know there was a wizard mode on that, and he's just been playing it for an hour and gone through all these levels and progressions I didn't even realize were there, and I was just like, I am not realizing, because I'm still stuck in a little bit of the 90s mode with pinball machines. The
Yeah,
modern ones have just so much depth to them and so much stuff you have to accomplish, kind of like a modern arcade game or a modern video game. Um, but you may not realize that when you just sit there and start hitting the ball.
I think I can't remember which machine it was, but I remember I think I was in college, so this would have been, early to mid 2000s, when I first discovered a pinball machine that had a second floor to it,
Oh, yeah.
where you knock the ball into a certain place and then it would like spit the ball out up top, and then you played like almost like a second mini pinball game
Oh, yeah.
before
There's
returning back
lots
to
that
the
do that.
main game. Yeah, yeah. That tripped me out because I had seen that in the video game version of pinball, but I'd never seen that in real life until I saw that machine. And that was sort of the indicator to me that uh, while a lot of the mechanics of pinball have remained the same over the years, it's not to say that pinball has been standing still. They've certainly made advancements.
Yeah. And
So
actually, two levels that came about in the 80s. That Black Knight game that I mentioned, sitting
really,
in the corner, like intimidating me, I had two levels.
really.
Yeah, I had a bunch of ramps that went right up into it.
Oh,
But it
okay, yeah,
was,
yeah, yeah.
but it had two levels.
So
Yeah.
what's the wildest machine that you've ever seen? Because at this point, I'm sure you've played at least once or twice, played a lot of different machines over the years. Is there one that stands out as like this thing is ridiculous or this thing shouldn't exist?
I can think of like two. So there's Hercules, which we have at our show, which is the biggest pinball machine ever made. Um, it
Okay.
barely fits in a truck bed. Um, and it's got a cue ball from a pool table as its ball. Um,
What?
it's a terrible game. It moves very slow. You have to wait forever for the ball to come back, but it's just wild that someone decided they were going to make a game that gigantic. Uh,
It's
but
literally twice the width.
yeah, so kids play it at our show, and they'll either get two kids, one on each button, or they'll be standing there with their arms out like full wingspan trying to play it.
Oh my god. I googled. I just had to Google a picture. I had to see this thing. It
Yeah.
is crazy.
So I only play that game for money. Me and one of the top female pinball players in the Northwest, Julie Gray, and we throw down $5 on it every year at the show. And because it moves really slow. It's
Right.
like a novelty game almost. It's got
Yeah.
cool artwork and stuff, but it was made by Atari. Um, but it's a little slow. And then the other one I'm going to throw out is Orbiter 1,
Orbiter. Okay.
which was a concept pinball machine, and it went into production, and it looks like the surface of Mars or something.
Okay.
Uh, and it's got magnets and a weird surface, and the ball does not behave at all like you would expect it to.
Oh, that is wild. The whole playfield is like warped.
Yeah. And we
Oh,
have it every couple of years at our show. Someone local owns one that will bring it sometimes. Um, so, like, you think you know a pinball machine, you sit down, you got two flippers, and the ball's
right.
going to come dropped. The ball's going to shoot off onto different directions with magnets and with weird. There's one weird spinner, I think. And if you play it for a while, you start to get a hang of it, but it's weird.
Yeah. This makes me angry just looking at it. Like, I have to play this. This is wild, man. Yeah, or Stern Orbiter 1 pinball. And so you guys get one of these every once in a while, or is this a regular thing at the
Yeah,
show?
it doesn't come every year, but I feel like it comes about every other year to our show.
You have like a local collector that has one?
Probably.
Yeah. Man, that is wild. That thing is so crazy looking. Huh.
So one thing about our show is um, there's some reliable games that show up every year. There's collectors that have big collections of certain kinds of games. Like there's
Yeah.
a guy that has a ton of Japanese arcade games,
Oh, okay.
probably the largest collection on the West Coast, and he brings 100 of them out, and maybe 75. A bunch of crazy Japanese games, like
Yeah.
one's rhythm games and dancing games. There's one with a banana joystick. Um, there's, yeah. Say no more.
Right. I'm just yeah,
there's
I'm picturing the memes and the photo opportunities. Yeah.
there's a guy that's a British guy that owns the European versions of a bunch of 80s arcade games that were released in Europe under a different, they all have different names and different artwork. It's very unique and cool. And he brings like a ton of them, and we have them all set up. And they're like games you're never going to see. I mean, Portland has a lot of cool arcades, but you're not going to see all that kind of weird old stuff. Or these one of a kind games where there's like Orbiter 1, there's
Yeah.
probably 100 of them out there. And we sometimes have one at the show, which is great.
Yeah. No,
And then we have homebrew games too, which is, I don't know if you know about this, but the homebrew DIY pinball community is a big thing that's like started in the last couple of years.
No.
Where people are building their own pinball machine to a theme that they love because no company's done it.
Huh.
And sometimes they create their own theme from scratch. Yeah, this is huge. So
Wow.
there's a local company up here called Fast Pinball, and they design boards, kind of like you'd have main boards for arcade games where you can program a bunch of arcade games into one cabinet.
Yeah.
They build boards so you can create your own pinball machine. You can wire all the bumpers up and the lights up and do the programming for it and wire up a display and stuff. So there's a bunch of people that are creating their own pinball machines that are one-of-a-kind pinball machines. And sometimes they get picked up by the companies and go for a larger run. Or they like the mechanics of it, but we'll put a different theme on it as they make it.
Yeah.
So the Iron Maiden pinball machine that came out like 8 years ago, that was based on an original design that someone had done of a Futurama pinball machine.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Literally last year at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, somebody had taken like Iron Maiden and Metallica and Aerosmith and a couple of, they made like a bank of like rock and roll band pinball machines, and they lined them all up right across from the DJ booth. And so I was watching people, like I watched this one guy walk up to the Aerosmith table, and I had Dream On sitting on the deck. And so
Oh,
I
this
was
is
waiting.
excellent.
I was waiting for him to walk up to the Aerosmith machine. I was like, all right, come on, dude. Like I'm sitting there, I'm playing my right deck, and I got Aerosmith on the left, and I'm just watching him. And as soon as he walked up and hit the start, because everything's set to, free play, right? So
Right.
as soon as I watched him walk up and hit the start button, boom, dropped Aerosmith,
Nice.
and then watched him start doing one of these as he's playing the pinball machine.
Right
I mean,
on.
you're there for 3 days, and you're just playing music all weekend long. So if those moments, those opportunities present themselves, you got to take them. You got to.
Oh, heck yeah.
But yeah, I've definitely seen the Iron Maiden machine. I don't know if you're familiar with Metal Jesus Rocks on YouTube, but he's one of the really well known personalities that is a massive supporter of the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. He comes out every year, and he's a huge metalhead. So anytime you get him talking about Sabbath or Maiden or Priest, like you'll become instant friends with the guy. It's pretty great.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Dan, I really appreciate you taking the time to join me here today and hang out. Before we go, is there anything that you'd like to let folks know about the Northwest Pinball and Arcade Show?
The dates, it's happening June 7th through 9th at the Greater Tacoma Convention Center. We're going to have 400. Last year we had 450 pinball and arcade games on free play the whole time. You could play all the games on the floor, ranging from the 1950s up until current games.
Oh, wow.
We're going to have guest speakers, a lot of games you've never seen before. We're doing a costume contest this year.
Oh, cool.
That's for the first time, because people have been showing up in costume, but we haven't fully embraced it. And this year we're going to.
Yeah, nice.
We have, I think we're a lot like the Portland show, in like we have vendors, there's food.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I saw something on your website about a charity vendor as well. Are you guys donating to charity amidst everything else?
Yeah. So since we're a nonprofit and all volunteer run, we always donate to charity. We've given about $50,000 worth in scholarships to college kids in Washington.
Huh.
We have them write essays, people thinking they're going into fields somewhat related to gaming, so art, engineering, that type of thing, which is great because some of these have been kids that have been going to our show since they were kids. And like there was one guy that won the kids pinball tournament when he was 10, and he was coming back and winning a scholarship when he was 18 and starting college, which is fantastic.
Man. That's so cool.
Yeah. And so we work with a bunch of other different charities. We work with Tacoma's got this thing called Fab Lab, which is they do classes and education for trying to help kids that don't have a lot of experience with STEAM oriented education, and really hands-on. So they were there last year, and we gave them some money, and they had them build little pinball machines and do all the electronics and did the artwork for them, and that was pretty cool.
Man.
We work with Comics for Kids. They give out free comics at the show. And this year we're also going to work with Project Pinball, and they bring pinball machines to hospitals, to kids wards where kids are dealing with really tough and hard diseases. So I think we're going to do a raffle for a brand new pinball machine, and that will also, so someone will win a brand new pinball machine, but it will also place a pinball machine in a local hospital. I think we're going to do either Children's Hospital or the Ronald McDonald House. And so there'll be a pinball machine for kids that are fighting cancer.
Yeah.
To play with and just have some relief.
Man, that's a really incredible cause, though, and I kind of wish I had led with that. I didn't know you had all that going on, man. That's
Yeah,
really fantastic. And
yeah,
I gotta call you out for this too, like, because this is really cool to me. You called it Steam, and as somebody who grew up around the arts, I was a band geek, and then eventually made a career in music. And so, you know, adding the arts part of Steam,
yeah,
was always so incredibly important to me. So to hear you call out Steam instead of STEM, like, dude,
yeah.
I truly appreciate you for that. Thank you for filling me in on all that cool stuff that you guys have going on up there at the Northwest Pinball and Arcade Show.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, Dan, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today and to hang out.
Oh yeah, this has been fun.
So that's going to do it for this episode of Pick Up and Play. As always, make sure you check out patreon.com/DJSwitchPDX, where you'll find even more content available for every single episode. We've got extended little bits that I like to call the lost levels, and they're available for every episode that we've done up to this point. Of course, my big thank you to Dan from Northwest Pinball and Arcade Show, and my big thank you to the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, as well as our sponsor, Vault 31 Bar, for helping to make this show happen. Stay tuned for next week, because I have a really special guest coming, and I am so excited to share that interview with you as well. So if you haven't, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. Make sure you're following on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts, because this show has been such a blast so far, but it's about to get really good. Okay. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you on the next one.